You can't handle this kitchen. The voice cracked sharply across the room, slicing through the chatter and clatter like a sudden winter wind. Jasmine Carter's hands froze mid-motion, a tray of fresh-baked bread teetering dangerously in her grip as the scent of garlic and simmering tomato sauce filled the air. She blinked rapidly, her dark eyes glistening with the beginnings of tears, but she didn't let go. The hardwood floor reflected the warm light of hanging Edison bulbs. Every shadow stretched long and nervous, and for a heartbeat, the bustling restaurant felt impossibly still. Orders shouted from the front desk, the sizzling of pans, the low hum of conversation, all faded into a tense silence around her. Jasmine inhaled, trying to steady her breath, remembering the words her mother had whispered countless times. Heart first, hands second. Always show kindness, even when no one notices. She adjusted the tray, letting a small, apologetic smile curve her lips toward a nearby colleague, Marcus, who had dropped a stack of plates in his own moment of flustered panic. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice soft but resolute, as she handed him a few plates. The world outside the kitchen walls continued unaware, cars honking down the street, a neon sign flickering overhead, but inside, time seemed to fold, each second stretching long and taut like a wire ready to snap. Jasmine set the last plate down gently, fingers brushing against the wooden edge, and exhaled. Her uniform, a crisp white shirt and black apron, felt suddenly heavier, soaked through with the sweat of exertion and nerves, the fabric clinging in the oppressive summer heat. From the far end of the room, a shadow detached itself from the dim glow of the doorway, moving deliberately but with a casual grace that seemed to slow the rhythm of the kitchen itself. Vin Diesel stepped in, his height commanding yet calm, the faint aroma of his cologne mixing oddly with the scent of rosemary and olive oil, his eyes sweeping the room as if searching for something, or someone. Jasmine's chest tightened, not with fear, but with that peculiar tension that comes from knowing you are being seen fully, without pretense, for the first time in a long while. The tray in her hands wobbled again as she shifted slightly, forcing her knees to lock and her back to straighten. In that instant, she was acutely aware of every sound, the faint drip of a faucet, the scraping of a chair across tile, the distant murmur of a delivery driver outside, and the subtle exhale of the man watching her, an observer of a quiet storm she had weathered alone. Jasmine's heart thumped, a steady, rapid beat, and she clenched her jaw, reminding herself of all the small victories she had earned, the order she delivered without complaint, the smile she gave to a worried patron, the whispered word of encouragement to a teammate struggling in the heat of service. She bent slightly to set the tray down on the counter, feeling the smooth wood under her palms, letting a sigh slip out. Not quite a surrender, but an acknowledgment of survival. Vin's gaze met hers across the kitchen, steady, unwavering, curious yet not judgmental, and for a second, the chaotic energy of the room seemed to converge on that small, electric line between them. The clatter of dishes in the background resumed gradually, but Jasmine no longer felt the weight of isolation. Instead, a flicker of something daring, something almost imperceptible, surged through her chest. The young server's lips twitched with a hesitant, private smile as she met his eyes again, realizing that the figure stepping quietly into her world was more than a casual observer. He was a threshold, a quiet interruption, a possible turn in a story she had never dared to imagine. Her hands lingered over the tray, the warmth of the kitchen lights casting soft reflections on the polished silverware, and she felt the air thrum with potential, the kind that hums low before a note of music soars. Vin Diesel's expression softened almost imperceptibly, a hint of surprise, a shadow of recognition, and the entire kitchen seemed to pause once more, caught between the heat of the summer afternoon and the electric anticipation of a moment that could pivot everything. Jasmine's pulse slowed slightly, a mix of relief and wonder, as she straightened fully, shoulders back, chin high, taking in the panorama of a kitchen alive with motion, yet tethered to the quiet weight of this shared gaze. And just as quickly, a new tension crept in, subtle and thrilling, like the sharp inhale before a revelation. Would this silent acknowledgment, this simple, unspoken exchange, ripple through the day in ways neither of them could predict? The bell above the restaurant door chimed. softly as Vin Diesel moved further inside, his gaze sweeping across the gleaming counters. The aroma of roasted peppers and simmering sauces thick in the summer air, catching every detail with the precision of someone who notices the unnoticed. Jasmine Carter shifted subtly, adjusting her apron, trying to appear focused on folding napkins, but the quiver of her hands betrayed the tension in her chest. The kitchen was alive with the hum of activity, the clatter of plates, the hiss of the grill, yet a subtle hush seemed to ripple through the room, a quiet acknowledgment of the weight of the moment. She remembered the morning rush, the flurry of orders stacked high, the near-perfect timing required to serve each table without complaint, and the subtle gestures of kindness she had extended to the busboy, the hostess, and even a tired line cook who had spilled sauce on his sleeve. Each movement, each careful placement of a plate or adjustment of silverware, felt magnified under the invisible lens of observation. Vin stepped closer, his sneakers silent against the polished hardwood, his eyes following the rhythm of her labor with a calm intensity that made the air feel dense, expectant, like the pause before a storm breaks. Jasmine straightened, chest rising with deliberate breaths, as she wiped a counter streaked with tomato juice, the rag rough under her palm, yet somehow comforting, a tactile anchor in the swirl of her emotions. The heat from the ovens pressed warmly against her back, beads of sweat collecting along her hairline, yet she remained upright, her focus unwavering, sensing that the small, unremarkable acts she had performed, the quiet smile to a frazzled server, the careful handling of a tray of desserts, the soft words of reassurance to a nervous hostess, had not gone entirely unseen. Vin's shadow stretched across the tiles as he paused by the pastry station, a hand resting casually on the counter, yet every muscle in his posture suggested alertness, a readiness to respond to the undercurrent of tension that Jasmine carried with her like a quiet melody. She lifted a bowl of freshly mixed salad, moving with precision, careful not to spill a single leaf, her eyes flicking momentarily toward him, catching a hint of curiosity in his steady gaze, a glimmer that seemed to measure the depth of her diligence and the subtle courage in her demeanor. The restaurant itself seemed to hold its breath, the low hum of conversation from the front dining area dimmed by the thick, fragrant air of sautéing vegetables and freshly baked bread, the ceiling lights reflecting off the polished countertops like distant stars, amplifying the stillness between observer and observed. Jasmine took another slow, deliberate breath, feeling the rhythm of the kitchen align with her own heartbeat, the careful choreography of plates, utensils, and folded napkins creating a quiet symphony of order amid potential chaos. She sensed that this quiet observation was not a test, but an acknowledgment, a momentary recognition of effort often invisible to the casual eye. Vin's expression softened, subtle lines around his eyes easing, as if a long-dormant awareness had been stirred by the sight of Jasmine's unwavering commitment to small acts of care and excellence. A faint smile tugged at his lips, almost imperceptible, and Jasmine felt a strange sense of relief, not because the tension disappeared, but because it had been noted, weighed, and held in the quiet balance of the room. As the afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, painting golden rectangles on the floor, she felt an unfamiliar warmth seep into her shoulders, a quiet confidence that the work she performed with such care mattered in ways larger than immediate recognition. The distant chatter, the hum of appliances, the soft clinking of glasses in the dining area, all continued, yet Jasmine's awareness narrowed to the space between her and the silent figure watching, each second stretching and folding, building toward a subtle crescendo of understanding and anticipation, a quiet tension that suggested a turning, a shift in the invisible current that governed the energy of the kitchen. In that shared, suspended moment, she allowed herself a single, unguarded thought, a fleeting acknowledgment that the simple act of continuing her work with integrity, attention, and care could ripple outward beyond the confines of polished countertops and flickering overhead lights, touching the unseen observer in ways she had only hoped for. The air was heavy, yet not oppressive, carrying the subtle scent of rosemary and thyme, of fresh dough and roasted peppers, blending with the silent acknowledgment that had passed between her and Vin Diesel, leaving the kitchen charged with possibility, the kind of quiet electricity that precedes a revelation, a change, or a moment that could linger long after the doors were closed, long after the final plate had been cleared, long after the echo of soft footsteps and careful hands had faded into memory. The clatter of the kitchen gradually resumed, a soft backdrop to the tension still hanging in the warm air. Yet Jasmine Carter felt the space between herself and the observing figure of Vin Diesel pulse with an almost tangible weight. She moved deliberately, carrying a tray of appetizers with precise, measured steps, her fingers gripping the edges tightly, the scent of toasted garlic and simmering sauces mingling with the faint aroma of his cologne, creating a strange and compelling layering of sensory detail. Each footfall on the polished hardwood echoed slightly, a reminder of the distance covered in this shared silence. And as she placed the first plate gently on a counter near the pass-through window, her eyes flicked upward, meeting his gaze again, a silent acknowledgment of mutual awareness. Vin's eyes softened incrementally, the subtle warmth in his expression a contrast to the controlled intensity that had marked his arrival moments earlier. Jasmine's heart beat steadily, a rhythm in time with the distant sizzle of vegetables in the sauté pans, the quiet scrape of a spatula across a skillet, the measured clink of a spoon in a mixing bowl. She felt a small spark of courage, an inward reassurance that the care and attention she poured into her work, the empathy extended to colleagues, and the silent acts of kindness to the front-of-house staff, had been witnessed and valued in some unspoken way. Moving to the prep table, she adjusted a row of neatly folded napkins, the linen rough and cool under her fingertips, and she allowed herself to notice the faint sunlight slanting through the large front windows, illuminating the small motes of dust in the air, catching the faint glimmer in her dark eyes as they met his once more. Vin Diesel shifted his weight slightly, the faint scrape of his sneaker on the floor catching Jasmine's attention, yet he remained stationary, a quiet sentinel observing, neither interrupting nor instructing, simply allowing the moment to exist in its own deliberate tempo. Jasmine's chest rose and fell with careful, even breaths as she carried a plate of desserts to a table near the window, balancing the weight and alignment with exacting attention, the aroma of chocolate and citrus zest drifting in the warm, mid-afternoon air, and she noticed the way a stray beam of sunlight highlighted the contours of his attentive posture, the subtle tilt of his head conveying thoughtfulness and curiosity. She returned to the counter to wipe down the surface, the rag damp against her palm, leaving faint streaks that reflected the overhead light in soft lines, and she felt a quiet satisfaction in the rhythm of her motion, the sense of order and care she could impose in a space that often felt chaotic. A server passed by with a tray of drinks, the delicate clinking of glassware punctuating the background, and Jasmine offered a brief nod, a small smile, a gesture she had learned carried more weight than words in moments like these. Vin Diesel's gaze followed her, and she felt the subtle tension ease slightly, the shared awareness stretching and contracting like a held breath, the ambient noise of the kitchen returning in waves, yet never entirely breaking the suspended focus between them. Jasmine adjusted her apron one final time, inhaling the combined scents of fresh herbs, warm bread, and simmering sauces, the heat of the kitchen pressing against her back, and in that moment, she realized the quiet dignity in her labor, the value of her attentiveness and patience, had not gone unnoticed. The subtle hum of conversation from the front dining area mingled with the clatter of dishes and the low hiss of the grill, creating a layered, textured backdrop, yet all of it felt secondary to the quiet, electric understanding between server and observer, a wordless acknowledgment that actions, however small and silent, could resonate beyond immediate perception, leaving a ripple that might touch the heart of someone in a position to recognize and respond. The afternoon sunlight shifted as the day progressed, casting longer shadows across the polished hardwood, and Jasmine felt an unfamiliar sense of calm, a quiet certainty that the observation she had felt moments ago had shifted something intangible, an invisible acknowledgment of her patience, care, and integrity. Her movements continued with practiced precision, yet each placement of a plate, each careful adjustment of utensils, was imbued with a renewed energy, a subtle buoyancy, the awareness that her conscientious attention could influence the day, the environment, and perhaps the perception of those around her in ways she had only dared to imagine. In the stillness between each motion, she allowed herself to notice the small details, the glint of sunlight on polished metal, the rhythmic hum of appliances, the shifting expressions of colleagues caught up in their own tasks. And she felt a quiet pride in the work she performed with deliberate care, a gentle reassurance that even in the busiest moments, attention and kindness carried weight, and that this simple truth was not lost on the silent observer who had entered her world with a measured, deliberate presence. The afternoon sun had begun to tilt, casting long, warm streaks of light across the bustling kitchen as Jasmine Carter carefully set a tray of desserts onto the side counter, the chocolate tarts gleaming under the overhead lights. The faint aroma of roasted garlic and simmering sauces wrapped around her like a soft blanket, grounding her amidst the controlled chaos of the kitchen. Every motion was deliberate, each placement precise, yet beneath the calm exterior, her heart beat with a quiet urgency, a tension carried from the early rush that had left her teetering on the edge of exhaustion. Vin Diesel remained a few feet away, leaning slightly against the counter, his posture relaxed but attentive, his gaze tracking every movement with the sharp awareness of someone accustomed to reading the subtle cues of those around him. Jasmine felt the weight of observation, a mixture of pressure and unspoken recognition, and she allowed herself to steady her breathing, inhaling the faint scent of fresh bread mingled with herbs and the slight tang of lemon from the salads she had just plated. The clatter of pots and pans resumed in the background, a rhythmic symphony punctuated by the low hum of conversation from the front dining area and the occasional call from servers navigating between tables. Yet there was an unspoken pause, a suspended beat in the tempo of the kitchen, tethered to the quiet exchange between the young server and the man who had silently entered her world. She moved to wipe down a counter streaked with the faint residue of sauce, the damp rag under her palm, leaving soft lines that caught the light in delicate patterns. And in that moment, she became acutely aware of the tactile sensation, the rhythm of her own breath, and the pulse of life around her, as if the kitchen itself had slowed to match the cadence of her intent focus. Vin's eyes flicked to a tray she carried to a neighboring table. Noting the careful alignment of plates, the even spacing of utensils, the attention to the smallest details that spoke of dedication and pride, a quiet testament to effort often invisible to casual observers. Jasmine felt a subtle warmth rise within her, a quiet reassurance that the meticulous care and kindness she had invested, not just in the food but in the small gestures toward colleagues and guests alike, had not gone unnoticed, that this silent acknowledgment was as potent as any spoken word. The kitchen lights glinted off the polished surfaces, reflecting the soft glow onto Vin's thoughtful expression, a mixture of curiosity and approval that added weight to the moment, amplifying the significance of acts often overlooked in the hurried motion of daily service. Jasmine adjusted her apron once more, smoothing the fabric over her shoulders, and allowed her eyes to sweep across the room, noting the small interactions, a busboy passing quietly with a tray, a hostess arranging menus, the quiet nods exchanged between staff in fleeting recognition of each other's efforts. Each movement was synchronized in a subtle choreography of efficiency and care, yet imbued with an undercurrent of empathy that seemed to radiate outward, touching not just those nearby, but the silent observer whose presence had transformed the space into something quietly extraordinary. She felt the moment stretch, each second laden with potential, the hum of appliances and muted chatter forming a backdrop to the unspoken connection, and in that suspended space, she sensed that the diligence, patience, and thoughtful attention she poured into every task had been measured and weighed, not for scrutiny, but for appreciation, the acknowledgment of quiet excellence that might ripple far beyond the confines of the kitchen walls. As she returned to a prep table to organize a row of freshly plated salads, the soft scrape of her hands across the polished wood and the gentle tap of utensils seemed amplified, each sound resonating with the care imbued in the motion, each gesture a testament to perseverance and focus. Vin Diesel remained at the edge of the room, a steady presence, allowing Jasmine the space to operate without interruption, his expression subtly shifting as he observed the seamless flow of her work, the attentiveness to both detail and people, and the quiet determination that spoke louder than words ever could. The late afternoon sunlight streaked across the countertops, catching the edges of the polished plates and the glint of stainless steel, creating a lattice of light and shadow that seemed to mirror the layered complexity of the moment. The visible labor, the invisible care, and the delicate acknowledgment shared silently between server and observer, a shared understanding that spoke of integrity, patience, and the quiet power of consistent, thoughtful action. The evening light shifted through the tall windows of the restaurant, painting elongated patterns across the polished hardwood, and Jasmine Carter moved with deliberate care, carrying a tray of freshly garnished salads toward the pass-through with steady hands, the faint scent of basil and roasted peppers trailing behind her in the warm air. Each step felt purposeful, a rhythm that mirrored the quiet intensity in her chest as she focused on balance, alignment, and timing, aware that even the smallest misstep could disrupt the harmony she had worked to maintain throughout the day. Vin Diesel remained a few paces behind, his posture relaxed yet attentive, observing the precision of her movements with an understated curiosity that made the kitchen feel suspended, almost sacred, in the thick, fragrant air. Jasmine inhaled slowly, letting the mixed aromas of olive oil, fresh citrus, and warm bread anchor her senses, grounding her in the tangible details of her work as she adjusted the edge of a plate, noticing the faint reflection of the overhead lights in the polished silverware and the smooth glaze of the ceramic dish. The kitchen buzzed with activity, the soft clatter of pots, the hiss of sautéing vegetables, the muted chatter of servers delivering orders to the dining area. Yet all of it felt like a carefully orchestrated background score to the central rhythm of her own movements and the subtle weight of Vin's observation. She wiped down the counter with precise strokes, feeling the texture of the damp rag against her palm, each pass a small assertion of control and care, the repetitive motion soothing in its familiarity, yet charged with the awareness that someone of influence had noted the effort. Vin's gaze followed her as she carried a tray of desserts to a side table, the small plates balanced with meticulous attention, and she felt a flicker of quiet pride in the alignment, the symmetry, the unspoken commitment to excellence that went far beyond simple compliance. A line cook glanced over with a brief, appreciative nod, and Jasmine allowed herself the merest hint of a smile, her confidence bolstered not by words but by the quiet acknowledgment of skill and integrity in the space around her. Vin Diesel's presence remained steady, the subtle shift in his posture as he stepped slightly closer to observe creating a delicate tension, an unspoken question hovering in the air about recognition, reward, and the ripple effect of consistent effort. Jasmine adjusted her apron again, smoothing the fabric across her shoulders, and exhaled softly, letting the warmth of the afternoon sun, the glow of the lights, and the aromatic mixture of spices and bread fill her awareness, a sensory reminder of the environment she shaped with deliberate attention. She moved to refill a carafe of water, the glass cold and smooth in her hand, each motion measured and precise, aligning with the rhythm of the kitchen and the subtle cadence of observation that seemed to stretch the moment out, allowing every gesture, every detail, every ounce of care to register fully in the shared space. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the rhythmic tapping of utensils on the counter, and the distant laughter of patrons in the dining area combined into a layered soundtrack, the background noise framing the subtle connection between server and silent observer. Jasmine's eyes met Vin's across the kitchen, a quiet recognition passing between them, a momentary acknowledgement that this routine, these seemingly mundane acts carried weight, carried meaning, carried the quiet power of consistency and kindness observed and valued. She straightened fully, shoulders back, chin high, feeling the energy shift subtly, a sense of validation emanating from the recognition that her diligence and empathy had been noted, the simple acts of care amplified by attention, creating a resonance that stretched beyond the immediate tasks at hand. As she carried the tray back to the prep area, she noticed the play of sunlight on the surfaces, the reflective gleam of polished silverware, the gentle sway of herbs and the light breeze from the open kitchen window, all layered into a sensory tapestry that grounded her in the present while signaling the subtle shift in the energy of the room. Vin Diesel remained a quiet, attentive presence, his gaze thoughtful, suggesting a pause, a reconsideration, a silent acknowledgment that effort, integrity, and attentiveness could not only be seen but felt, creating a tension poised for resolution, a space pregnant with possibility. The quiet hum of the kitchen continuing as both a backdrop and a partner to the unfolding awareness and connection that lingered between them. The kitchen lights glowed warmly as the late afternoon shifted toward early evening, casting long, soft shadows across the polished hardwood floors and gleaming counters. The aroma of roasted vegetables, fresh herbs, and baked bread filling the air with a comforting richness that contrasted with the tension lingering in Jasmine Carter's chest. She moved deliberately, carrying a tray of carefully plated desserts toward the service window, balancing each plate with precision, her fingers grazing the edges with practiced care, the faint scent of chocolate and citrus mingling with the warm air around her. Vin Diesel stepped lightly across the floor, his presence steady, his eyes tracking every movement, noting the calm focus, the attentive gestures, and the subtle confidence that belied her young age. Jasmine exhaled softly, feeling the rhythm of the kitchen align with her own heartbeat, the low hum of conversation from the dining area providing a gentle soundtrack, the distant clatter of dishes and the hiss of the sauté pans punctuating the air in sync with her movements. She adjusted a row of silverware, lining each piece with exacting care, and glanced up, meeting Vin's gaze for a brief moment, sensing an unspoken acknowledgment, a quiet recognition of the care she had invested in her work and in the small acts of kindness she had extended to the team around her. The sunlight slanted through the tall windows, creating a lattice of light across the counters, highlighting the warm tones of the wooden surfaces and the glimmer of polished metal, reflecting in Jasmine's focused eyes as she continued her task, each motion deliberate, each breath measured. Vin remained a few steps behind, observing without interruption, his presence a quiet weight that seemed to amplify the significance of each small act, the simple gestures and attentiveness taking on a resonance far beyond the immediate task. Jasmine felt the heat of the kitchen pressing against her back, the warmth mixing with the faint hint of lemon and basil in the air, grounding her in the tangible sensations of her environment. And in that awareness, she found a quiet reassurance, a subtle confirmation that her dedication was being noticed, the recognition unspoken yet undeniable. Placement to ensure symmetry, aligning the forks and knives with careful precision, the soft clinking of silverware punctuating her measured steps, the rhythm of her movements syncing with the low, steady thrum of activity around her. Vin's expression softened slightly, a subtle smile forming as he observed the poise and care she displayed, the quiet dignity in her labor, the attention to detail that spoke of pride and empathy rather than obligation. Jasmine returned to the prep table, wiping down the surface with a damp cloth, feeling the texture under her palm, noting the light reflecting off the smooth wood and stainless steel, the subtle play of shadow and illumination highlighting the space around her, creating a tactile and visual rhythm that mirrored the careful cadence of her work. She straightened fully, shoulders back, chin lifted, sensing the quiet acknowledgment in Vin's gaze, a silent resonance that communicated more than words could express, a recognition of integrity, patience, and thoughtfulness expressed through deliberate, consistent action. The low hum of appliances, the soft scrape of utensils, the muted chatter of servers in the front of the house all layered into a complex yet gentle background. Yet within it, the space between her and the silent observer felt charged, a subtle electricity that hinted at the potential for connection, understanding, and perhaps even change. The ordinary act of careful labor elevated into a moment of significance by attention and observation. Jasmine adjusted her apron, smoothing it across her shoulders, and exhaled slowly, letting the combination of warm kitchen air, sunlight, and the rich aromas envelop her, grounding her in the present while heightening the sense of anticipation and potential, the faint awareness that this simple, diligent attention to every detail could resonate beyond the immediate room, touching the silent observer in ways she had not yet imagined. Each placement of a plate, each careful adjustment of silverware, each deliberate breath was imbued with intent, a quiet power communicated through action, patience, and empathy, creating a resonance that filled the space, bending the air with the unspoken recognition of effort, integrity, and presence. The late afternoon light shifted, catching the glint of polished metal, the curves of freshly baked bread, the subtle reflections in the ceramic plates, all converging in a visual symphony that mirrored the invisible currents of acknowledgment and appreciation that stretched between Jasmine and Vin Diesel, a delicate, quiet energy that promised subtle transformation and the possibility of deeper understanding, leaving the room poised in a suspended, expectant rhythm, alive with potential. The golden hue of the late afternoon sun stretched long across the counters as Jasmine Carter adjusted the alignment of a row of appetizers, her fingers lightly brushing the edges of the plates, the faint aroma of roasted garlic and warm bread mingling with the scent of herbs and citrus lingering in the kitchen air. Every movement was careful, measured, deliberate, each step echoing softly on the polished hardwood, a rhythm that matched the quiet intensity of her heartbeat as she focused on maintaining order and composure amidst the steady hum of activity around her. Vin Diesel remained at the edge of the kitchen, his posture relaxed but attentive, eyes following the precision in her hands, noting the subtle confidence and unwavering attention to detail that radiated from every gesture, the quiet dedication that spoke volumes without a single word being exchanged. Jasmine exhaled slowly, the warmth of the kitchen pressing against her back, the soft glow of light illuminating her face and reflecting off the polished surfaces, and she allowed herself to feel the steady pulse of accomplishment that came from being fully present in each action, each adjustment of silverware, each careful placement of a plate. The sounds of the kitchen, the soft clatter of dishes, the rhythmic hiss of sautéing pans, the muted chatter of servers moving between tables, formed a textured background to the silent, electric attention that existed between her and the man observing, a connection unspoken yet profound, suspended in the warmth and aroma of the bustling space. Jasmine moved to refill a carafe of water, the glass cool and smooth in her hand, feeling the weight and solidity of it as she carried it back to the counter, her eyes briefly meeting Vin's gaze across the room, catching the hint of a small, approving nod, a subtle acknowledgment of her perseverance and grace under pressure. She straightened fully, shoulders back, chin lifted, letting the calm, measured cadence of her movements reflect the care and intentionality she brought to each task, each gesture imbued with empathy and thoughtfulness, quietly weaving a thread of connection that stretched across the kitchen and into the attentive presence of her observer. The soft interplay of sunlight and shadow shifted across the hardwood and countertops, highlighting the sheen on polished silverware, the glint of glass, and the warm tones of baked bread and fresh vegetables, each surface a canvas reflecting the meticulous, careful attention Jasmine poured into her work. Vin Diesel's expression softened, a subtle warmth appearing in the lines around his eyes as he noted the consistency and dedication in her approach, the patience and kindness that had been threaded through the day, now illuminated in the quiet rhythm of her movements. Jasmine adjusted the edge of a tray, realigned a napkin, and allowed herself a brief exhale, the soft sound mingling with the low hum of activity, a private acknowledgment that her steady focus, empathy, and quiet competence had not gone unnoticed, that even in the background of a busy kitchen, the simplest acts of care could ripple outward with far-reaching resonance. The gentle scent of herbs, the faint tang of citrus, the warmth of freshly baked bread, and the lingering aroma of roasting vegetables filled her senses, grounding her fully in the present moment while amplifying the sense of anticipation, the quiet electricity of shared observation between server and observer. Each motion, each breath, each careful placement of plate and utensil carried the weight of intention, a deliberate statement of competence and character, and Vin Diesel remained a quiet presence, allowing the energy to settle and flow naturally, letting the subtleties of action and observation unfold in a rhythm that spoke more than words could, a profound acknowledgment of integrity, patience, and the quiet power of consistent attention to detail. Jasmine's gaze drifted to the far corner of the kitchen, catching the soft gleam of sunlight on polished counters, the reflective surface of utensils, and the subtle shadows cast across warm wood, all woven together into a rich tapestry of sight, sound, and scent that framed the space between her and the silent figure observing. a moment pregnant with possibility, anticipation, and quiet connection that hinted at the transformative weight of recognition and shared awareness, leaving the kitchen alive with an unspoken understanding, poised on the cusp of subtle revelation and the promise of acknowledgment beyond the immediate tasks of the day. The kitchen had quieted slightly as the evening progressed, the sunlight fading into a warm amber glow that filtered through the tall windows, casting soft, elongated shadows across the polished hardwood floors and the gleaming counters. Jasmine Carter moved with deliberate precision, carrying a tray of carefully prepared desserts toward the pass-through window, her fingers steady despite the lingering tension in her chest, the faint scent of chocolate, citrus, and fresh herbs mingling in the thick, warm air. Every motion she made was intentional, from the alignment of plates to the careful placement of utensils, the rhythm of her steps echoing lightly against the wood, creating a subtle cadence that resonated with the quiet focus of the space around her. Vin Diesel remained a few paces behind, his posture relaxed yet attentive, his eyes tracing each of her movements, noting the exactitude and care, the quiet poise, and the subtle confidence that radiated from her every gesture. Jasmine inhaled deeply, letting the combined aromas of roasted peppers, simmering sauces, and fresh bread anchor her senses, grounding her in the tangible details of her work while heightening her awareness of the silent observation that had become almost palpable in the air. The low hum of the kitchen appliances, the gentle clatter of dishes, and the muted conversation from the front dining area formed a layered soundtrack to the tension and focus she carried, a subtle counterpoint to the still, intense presence of Vin at the edge of the room. Effort she had invested in the space. She straightened fully, shoulders back, chin high, her dark eyes catching the soft amber glow across the room, and allowed herself to notice the small, ordinary gestures that carried extraordinary weight. The brief nod to a passing busboy, the quiet encouragement given to a nervous server, the careful alignment of utensils and plates that spoke of pride, care, and integrity. The ambient sounds of the kitchen, the rhythmic sizzle of vegetables on the grill, the gentle scrape of utensils, and the low hum of conversation from the front of the house continued to provide a textured background to the focused energy between Jasmine and the silent observer, the tension stretching and folding in the warm, aromatic air like a held breath. Each step she took, each placement of a plate, each meticulous adjustment of a napkin or utensil, carried with it the quiet authority of someone who understood the importance of diligence, empathy, and care, the subtle resonance of intention felt by the attentive presence observing her. Jasmine felt the moment expand, each second steeped in potential, a quiet electricity filling the kitchen as sunlight slanted across polished counters and stainless steel, highlighting the nuanced interplay of light, shadow, and reflective surfaces. She allowed herself a small, private acknowledgment of the recognition she sensed, a subtle, wordless understanding that her efforts had not only been observed but valued, the simple acts of conscientious care creating a resonance that seemed to settle around her and the man at the edge of the room, imbuing the space with anticipation, quiet validation, and the potential for something transformative beyond the immediate tasks at hand. Of vegetables, the soft clatter of dishes, the faint murmur of conversation beyond the prep area. Yet the focal point remained the silent interplay of recognition, patience, and meticulous care between Jasmine and the man observing. She returned to the prep table to organize a small stack of plates, aligning them with exacting care, the faint aroma of citrus and chocolate filling the space. And in that moment, she felt a profound sense of presence, of being fully seen, her diligence and empathy resonating quietly through every detail. Every small act performed with intention and thoughtfulness. The late afternoon sunlight faded into deeper gold, glancing off the polished counters and reflecting in the soft sheen of stainless steel, highlighting the textures and contours of the space as Jasmine moved with precise rhythm, each motion deliberate, a testament to quiet resilience, integrity, and attention to detail. Vin Diesel's gaze remained steady, watching the unbroken line of focus, patience, and care, the subtle energy between them stretching and folding in the air, a suspended awareness that carried weight and potential, the space filled with the quiet tension and anticipation of recognition, the promise of understanding, and the deep, unspoken appreciation of effort that could ripple far beyond the polished counters, the gleaming plates, and the familiar, comforting aromas of the kitchen. The kitchen was bathed in a warm, fading glow as the late afternoon slipped toward evening, the sunlight casting elongated, soft shadows across the polished hardwood and reflecting off the gleaming countertops. Jasmine Carter moved with careful precision, carrying a tray of freshly plated desserts to the service area, her steps deliberate, the soft clink of plates punctuating the rhythm of her motion, each gesture a testament to focus, patience, and attention to detail. The subtle aroma of roasted garlic, fresh herbs, and citrus drifted through the air, intertwining with the faint warmth of baked bread and simmering sauces, creating a sensory tapestry that grounded her in the tangible reality of the space. Vin Diesel observed from the edge of the kitchen, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp, tracking her movements with an intensity that conveyed awareness, curiosity, and quiet appreciation, his presence amplifying the weight of every action she took. Jasmine exhaled slowly, feeling the tension that had coiled within her chest loosen just slightly, replaced by a quiet confidence, a sense of being seen and understood through her meticulous work and the subtle kindness she had extended to colleagues and the dining staff alike. She adjusted a napkin on the counter with deliberate care, the folds catching the soft light in delicate lines, and in that moment, the unspoken connection between server and observer seemed to stretch, expanding the space with the quiet resonance of recognition.